The coastal highway stretched endlessly before Leah Parker's windshield, a ribbon of asphalt bordered by darkness on one side and the infinite black of the ocean on the other. It was past midnight, and the road belonged to her alone, no headlights behind, none ahead. Just the rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs below and the soft hum of her aging sedan's engine. She'd driven this route 1,000 times, returning from her late shift at the hospital in the city, her scrubs still smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. Tonight felt no different from any other. She was thinking about her empty refrigerator, the bills piling on her kitchen counter, and whether she'd remember to set her alarm for the morning shift. Ordinary thoughts for an ordinary life. But the universe had other plans. The sky erupted. A flash of orange and white tore through the darkness, so sudden and brilliant that Leah instinctively slammed on the brakes. Her car skidded slightly before stopping in the middle of the empty road. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared upward, her mouth falling open. A private jet, sleek, expensive, the kind that belonged to people who lived in a different world, was plummeting from the sky in a spiral of fire and black smoke. The sound came next, a screaming roar of failing engines, then the sickening crunch of metal meeting water. The impact sent a shockwave across the surface of the ocean, and flames spread across the waves like liquid gold. For a moment, Leah sat frozen, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to drive away, to call emergency services, to let someone else handle whatever nightmare had just fallen from the sky. But her body moved before her mind could catch up. She threw open the car door, kicked off her shoes, and ran toward the cliff's edge. The night air bit at her skin as she descended the rocky path to the beach below, her bare feet slipping on wet stones. The wreckage was already sinking, the tail section disappearing beneath the waves while the front half burned with a fierce, almost defiant light. She didn't think. She dove. The cold water was a shock that stole her breath, but she pushed forward, swimming toward the wreckage with powerful strokes. The heat from the flames was intense, even from several feet away, and the smell of burning fuel filled her nose. Through the smoke and firelight, she saw him, a figure slumped in what remained of the cockpit, strapped into a leather seat that was quickly being consumed by fire. His head hung forward, dark hair matted with blood, and his expensive suit was torn and soaked. Leah grabbed onto a piece of twisted metal, using it to pull herself closer. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the seatbelt, the metal buckle hot to the touch. The plane groaned, listing further into the water. "Come on, come on," she muttered through gritted teeth, her fingers finally finding the release mechanism. The belt snapped free, and the man's full weight fell against her. He was heavy, solid muscle beneath the ruined clothing, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She hooked her arms under his shoulders and kicked backward, dragging him away from the sinking wreckage just as another explosion sent a plume of fire skyward. The swim back to shore felt endless, her muscles screaming, her lungs burning, but she refused to let go. When her feet finally touched sand, she hauled him up the beach, far from the water's edge, and collapsed beside him. Her chest heaved as she gulped air, her entire body trembling from cold and exertion. The man lay motionless, seawater pooling around him, his face turned to the side. In the distant glow of the dying fire, she could see his features clearly for the first time. He was young, maybe 30, perhaps a bit older, with a face that could have been carved from marble. Even unconscious and bleeding, there was something commanding about him, something that made her instinctively straighten her posture. A platinum watch worth more than her car clung to his wrist. His shirt had torn open, revealing intricate black ink that snaked across his collarbone and down his muscular chest. Designs that looked European, elegant, and somehow dangerous. And there, nestled in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket, was a gun. Leah's breath caught. This was no ordinary businessman. No corporate executive traveled with a weapon strapped to his ribs. Her hands hovered over his chest, checking for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. He was alive. She should call the police. She should call someone. But something in the way he was dressed, in the calculated perfection of that weapon, in the cold weight of the situation, made her hesitate. Instead, she made a decision that would change everything. She dragged him to her car, somehow managing to get his considerable weight into the back seat, and drove home in silence, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Her small house sat at the end of a quiet street, far from prying eyes, a blessing she'd never appreciated until now. She managed to get him inside, laying him on her couch and covering him with blankets. His breathing was shallow but regular, and the blood on his face came from a gash above his eyebrow rather than anything life-threatening. She cleaned his wounds with practiced efficiency, her nursing training taking over even as her hands shook. When she finally sat back, the first light of dawn was creeping through her windows, and she realized she'd been awake for 24 hours straight. The stranger lay still on her couch, his chest rising and falling steadily, his face peaceful despite everything. Leah made coffee she couldn't drink and stared at her phone a dozen times without dialing. She paced her small living room, glancing at him every few seconds as if expecting him to vanish or transform into something else entirely. Who was he? What had happened to that plane? And why did every instinct she possessed tell her that bringing him here had just thrown her simple, predictable life into chaos? As the sun rose higher, painting golden streaks across her walls, the man's eyes flickered. Then they opened, dark, intelligent, and immediately alert, despite the trauma he'd endured. He assessed the room in a single sweep before his gaze locked onto hers. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, accented. Italian, she thought, or perhaps something close to it, and carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate answers. "My house," Leah said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "You were in a plane crash. I pulled you out." He sat up slowly, wincing but moving with a control that suggested he'd powered through pain before. His hand went instinctively to his chest, finding the gun still there. Then he relaxed slightly. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You saved my life." "I suppose I did. What's your name?" "Leah Parker." He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory, then his eyes hardened. "Leah Parker. Whatever you think you know about who I am or what happened tonight, you need to forget it. No police, no hospitals. No one can know I'm here." It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the certainty of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Leah should have been afraid, should have demanded answers, should have done 100 things differently. But instead, she just nodded, understanding in that moment that she'd become part of something far bigger and far more dangerous than a simple rescue. The stranger settled back against the couch, his eyes never leaving hers. And in the growing light of morning, Leah heard it. The sound of engines. Many engines. Powerful and approaching fast. The rumble grew louder, a mechanical thunder that didn't belong in her quiet neighborhood. Leah moved to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to see the street. Her breath caught in her throat. 3 black SUVs, massive, gleaming vehicles with tinted windows so dark they looked like rolling shadows, pulled up in perfect formation in front of her house. The engines died simultaneously, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the doors opened, and men emerged. 10 of them, all dressed identically in black suits that fit like they'd been tailored yesterday, with crisp white shirts and ties that caught the morning light. They moved with military precision, each step coordinated, each movement deliberate. These weren't security guards or local police. These were soldiers in civilian clothing. "Oh, God," Leah whispered, her hand falling from the curtain. She spun to face the stranger, who was now standing despite his injuries, his expression cold and calculating. "There are men outside. 10 of them. I know." He moved to the window with surprising speed, glancing out with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd assessed threats 1,000 times before. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "They're mine." "Yours?" Leah's voice rose an octave. "What do you mean they're yours?" Before he could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not the friendly tap of a neighbor or the authoritative pound of law enforcement, but something in between, respectful, yet unyielding. The stranger straightened, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injuries. But when he spoke, his voice carried effortlessly through the door. "Stato." The single word, Italian for status, hung in the air. From outside came a response, also in Italian, delivered in clipped, professional tones. The stranger listened, then responded with a series of rapid commands. Leah understood none of it, but she heard the authority in his voice, the way these men on the other side of her door responded with immediate acknowledgement. When the brief exchange ended, he turned to her, and for the first time since waking, something almost like regret flickered across his features. "I need to explain something to you, Leah Parker. But first, I need to know, do you live alone?" "Yes. Why does that matter?" "Because in approximately 30 seconds, my men are going to conduct a security sweep of your property. They won't harm you, but they will be thorough. I need you to remain calm and do exactly as I say. Can you do that?" Leah wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers, wanted to throw him out of her house and pretend the last 8 hours had never happened. Instead, she found herself nodding, that same inexplicable trust that had made her dive into burning wreckage now keeping her rooted to the spot. The stranger, she still didn't know his name, moved to the door and opened it. Immediately, 2 of the suited men entered, their eyes sweeping the room with professional efficiency. They barely glanced at Leah, their attention focused entirely on their employer. One of them, a man with silver streaks in his dark hair and a scar running from his temple to his jaw, stepped forward. "Boss, siamo qui per portarti via. Il dottore è in attesa." The man's Italian was rapid, but Leah caught the word dottore, doctor. "Non ancora," the stranger replied, holding up a hand. "C'è qualcosa che devo fare prima." The scarred man's eyes flicked to Leah, then back to his boss. Whatever unspoken question hung between them was answered with a slight shake of the stranger's head. The man nodded and gestured to the others, who spread through the house with silent efficiency. Leah heard them moving through her bedroom, her bathroom, even checking her small backyard. Within minutes, they regrouped in the living room, each offering a brief nod that apparently signified, "All clear." The stranger turned to Leah, and this time when he looked at her, she saw something new in his eyes, a combination of respect and concern. "You need to sit down for what I'm about to tell you." "I think I'd rather stand." A slight smile. "Fair enough." He gestured to the men surrounding them. "These men work for me. They've been searching for me since my plane went down last night. By now, they've likely eliminated any trace of the crash. The wreckage has been removed, the area sanitized, and any witnesses have been encouraged to forget what they saw." "Encouraged?" Leah's voice was barely a whisper. "Paid well and convinced it's in their best interest to remain silent." "I don't kill civilians, Leah, but I do protect my interests." He paused, studying her face. "You're wondering who I am. What kind of man requires this level of security? What you've gotten yourself involved in by pulling me from that water." The thought had crossed my mind. "My name is Alessandro Russo. I run one of the largest international organizations in Europe. We handle various enterprises, some legal, many not. I have enemies who would pay millions to see me dead, which is why last night's crash was no accident. Someone tried to kill me, and they very nearly succeeded. He took a step closer, his dark eyes never leaving hers. You saved my life, Leah Parker. In doing so, you've placed yourself in considerable danger. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Leah felt her legs weaken, and despite her earlier defiance, she sank into the nearest chair. What kind of danger? The kind where people who want me dead will want to know how I survived. They'll investigate. They'll search for anyone who might have helped me, if they find you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. So what happens now? Leah asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded, despite the terror coursing through her veins. Alessandro exchanged a look with the scarred man, who stepped forward. Possiamo proteggerla, boss. Casa sicura, nuova identità. No. Alessandro's response was immediate and firm. She saved my life. I won't repay that debt by forcing her into hiding. He turned back to Leah. I need you to trust me for 2 more days. My men will maintain a discreet presence around your house. You won't see them, but they'll be there. In 48 hours, I'll have eliminated the threat and dealt with whoever tried to kill me. After that, you can return to your normal life. And if you can't eliminate the threat in 2 days, then I'll stay here until I do. Leah laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. You want to hide in my house? The head of a criminal organization wants to use my living room as a safe house? I've hidden in far worse places. There was something almost boyish in his smile, a glimpse of the man beneath the calculated exterior. Besides, you have a comfortable couch. Despite everything, the guns, the suited men, the impossible situation, Leah found herself returning the smile. It was insane. Completely, utterly insane. She should be calling the police, the FBI, anyone who could remove this dangerous stranger from her life. But when she looked at him, all she could see was the unconscious man she'd dragged from burning wreckage, the weight of him in her arms, the way she'd refused to let the ocean claim him. She'd saved his life. And now, inexplicably, she felt responsible for seeing him through whatever came next. 2 days, she said finally. But you need to tell your men to be less obvious. Black SUVs in this neighborhood stick out like... It's already handled, the scarred man interjected in accented English. We have vehicles being delivered within the hour. A pickup truck, a sedan, a minivan. Neighborhood appropriate. Alessandro nodded approvingly. Marco is my head of security, former Italian special forces. If he says you're protected, you're protected. Marco offered Leah a slight bow, which felt absurdly formal given the circumstances. The other men began filing out, leaving only Marco and 2 others who positioned themselves by the windows. Alessandro moved back to the couch, finally allowing the exhaustion and pain to show on his face. Leah's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. You need proper medical attention. Those wounds should be cleaned again, and you probably have a concussion. The doctor will be here within the hour, traveling separately to avoid suspicion. Until then. He gestured to the couch. I'll rest. You need food, too. When did you last eat? He thought for a moment. Yesterday afternoon, before the flight. Leah stood, grateful for something practical to focus on. I'll make breakfast. You... She pointed at Alessandro. Stay there, and you... She addressed Marco. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid like trying to stand up. Marco's lips twitched with something that might have been amusement. Si, signorina. As Leah moved to her small kitchen, she could hear the low murmur of Italian behind her, Alessandro giving quiet orders while Marco responded with military efficiency. She cracked eggs into a pan, her hands somehow steady despite the surreal nature of her morning. A Mafia boss on her couch, armed guards in her living room, and somewhere out there, people who wanted Alessandro Russo dead and would kill anyone who got in their way. 2 days, she told herself. Just 2 days. and then her life would return to normal. But even as she thought it, Leah knew it was a lie. Nothing would ever be normal again. The doctor arrived exactly 63 minutes later, a small, precise man in his 60s carrying a black medical bag that looked like it belonged in a museum. He introduced himself as Dr. Castellano, spoke in rapid Italian with Alessandro, and then said about his examination with the efficiency of someone who'd treated gunshot wounds and knife injuries far more often than the flu. Leah watched from the kitchen doorway as he checked Alessandro's pupils, cleaned and redressed the head wound, and performed a series of tests that confirmed what she'd already suspected. Mild concussion, several cracked ribs, extensive bruising, but nothing life-threatening. The man was extraordinarily lucky. "Your nurse here did excellent work," Dr. Castellano said in surprisingly good English, nodding toward Leah. "The wound care was professional. You have medical training?" "I'm a registered nurse. I work at St. Catherine's Hospital downtown." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Fortunate for our friend. Another hour in that water and hypothermia would have claimed him regardless of the injuries." He packed his instruments with meticulous care. "I'm leaving antibiotics, pain medication, and detailed instructions. Change the dressings twice daily. No strenuous activity for at least a week. Though I suspect he'll ignore that advice." Alessandro, who'd been silent throughout the examination, offered a slight smile. "You know me too well, dottore. I've been cleaning up your messes for 15 years, Alessandro. I know you better than you know yourself." The old man's tone was affectionate despite the harsh words. "This young woman saved your life. I hope you plan to repay that debt appropriately." "I intend to." Alessandro's eyes found Leah's across the room, in ways she hasn't yet imagined. The comment sent an unexpected flush across Leah's cheeks, though she couldn't quite identify why. Dr. Castellano departed with the same quiet efficiency he'd arrived with, leaving behind enough medical supplies to stock a small clinic. The day stretched ahead, strange and suspended. Leah called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, her supervisor's concern palpable even through the phone. Outside, she could see the promised replacement vehicles, a sensible Toyota sedan, a weathered pickup truck, and a soccer mom minivan, parked at strategic points around the block. Marco's men had changed clothes too, now wearing jeans and casual shirts that made them look like neighborhood fathers, rather than trained killers. Alessandro slept through most of the morning, his body finally surrendering to the trauma it had endured. Leah found herself watching him more often than she should, studying the harsh lines of his face that softened slightly in sleep, the way his hand occasionally moved to his chest as if checking for the weapon that Marco had temporarily confiscated for cleaning. He was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, the kind of beautiful that got people into trouble. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and those eyes that, even closed, seemed to see everything. She busied herself with mundane tasks: laundry, dishes, returning emails she'd been neglecting. But her mind kept circling back to the impossible reality of her situation: a mafia boss in her house. That's what Alessandro was, even if the word felt too cinematic, too divorced from reality. Yet the evidence was everywhere. The way Marco's men moved with lethal precision, the unquestioning obedience they showed their boss, the sophisticated communication devices they carried, the fact that they'd made an entire plane crash disappear overnight. This wasn't a movie. This was her life now, at least for 2 more days. Around 3 in the afternoon, Alessandro woke. He sat up slowly, testing his body's limitations, then caught Leah's eye and offered a slight nod, a gesture that felt more intimate than words. She brought him water, which he drank gratefully, and a sandwich she'd prepared, which he consumed with surprising delicacy for someone who'd nearly died 12 hours earlier. "Tell me about yourself," he said suddenly, setting down the empty plate. Leah blinked. "What?" "You saved my life. The least I can do is know who you are, where you're from, why you were driving on that coastal highway at midnight." She almost refused. This man didn't deserve her story, didn't deserve anything from her, except the rescue she'd already provided. But something in his expression, a genuine curiosity beneath the calculated exterior, made her answer. I grew up in Seattle, came here for nursing school and never left. I work night shifts because they pay more, and I was driving home after a particularly long one. Nothing exciting, nothing dramatic, just ordinary. Ordinary, Alessandro repeated, as if testing the word. You jumped into the ocean to pull a stranger from a burning plane. There's nothing ordinary about that. It was instinct. I didn't think about it, which makes it even more remarkable. He leaned forward slightly, wincing at the movement. Most people think, they calculate the risk, weigh the potential consequences, consider their own safety. You just acted. That kind of courage is rare, Leah. Even in my world, where violence is common, true courage is precious. Your world. Leah sat across from him, finally asking the question that had been burning in her mind all day. What exactly is your world, Alessandro? You said you run an organization. What does that mean? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers as if deciding how much truth she could handle. I run a network that spans 12 countries across Europe and parts of Asia. We deal in information, protection, logistics, and yes, occasionally things that skirt or cross legal boundaries. I inherited the organization from my father, who inherited it from his father before him. It's a legacy written in blood and money, and it's the only life I've ever known. So, you're a criminal. By most definitions, yes. He didn't flinch from the word. But I'm also the man who keeps hundreds of families employed, who maintains order in places where governments have failed, who protects people that the law has forgotten. The world isn't as simple as good and evil, Leah. It's painted in shades of gray, so dark they're almost black. And the people who tried to kill you? What shade of gray are they? A muscle tightened in his jaw. The darkest kind. Rivals who think my death will create a power vacuum they can exploit. They're wrong, of course. My organization is too well established, too deeply rooted. But they'll try regardless, and innocent people will die in the crossfire if I don't stop them first. How will you stop them? By doing what I do best, finding their weakness, exploiting it, and making an example that ensures no one else tries something so foolish again. His voice was cold now, the warmth from moments earlier evaporating into something harder. I don't enjoy violence, Leah, but I'm very, very good at it. The admission should have terrified her, should have sent her running to the police, or at least to her bedroom to lock the door. Instead, Leah felt an odd sense of understanding. She'd spent years as a nurse, seeing the aftermath of violence, gunshot wounds, stabbings, domestic abuse. She knew there were people in the world who chose cruelty, who inflicted pain without thought or remorse. And she knew there were people like Alessandro, who operated in darkness but by some twisted logic maintained a code, a structure, rules that governed their lawlessness. The plane crash, she said. How did it happen? Explosives planted in the landing gear compartment, timed to detonate at cruising altitude. Sophisticated work, likely military grade. The pilot managed to send a distress signal before we went down, which is how Marco and the others knew where to search. But the bomber made one mistake. They assumed I'd die in the initial explosion or the impact. They didn't account for the possibility that someone might. He trailed off, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. They didn't account for you. So I've ruined their plans. Spectacularly. A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his features from handsome to devastating. You've also put yourself in their crosshairs, which is why I need to resolve this quickly. I won't have your blood on my conscience, Leah Parker. How noble of you. Don't mistake pragmatism for nobility. If you die because of me, I lose something valuable, a life debt I can never repay. That's unacceptable. They sat in silence for a while, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and painting golden rectangles across the worn carpet. Outside, Leah could see Marco talking quietly into a phone, his expression grave. Inside, she was alone with a man who represented everything she'd been taught to fear and avoid, yet who looked at her with something approaching reverence. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "What happens after the 2 days?" she asked finally. "I disappear from your life. My men maintain surveillance for another week to ensure no threats emerge, and then you never see me again. You return to your ordinary existence, and I return to mine. It's cleaner that way." Cleaner. The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you want?" Alessandro's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something vulnerable beneath the armor. A flicker of loneliness, of a life lived always looking over his shoulder, trusting no one completely. "What I want and what's best for you are two very different things. You deserve a life free from the shadows I bring with me." That's not an answer. "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not." Before either could say more, Marco entered without knocking, his expression urgent. He spoke rapidly in Italian, and Leah watched Alessandro's face transform from relaxed to deadly in an instant. He stood despite his injuries, moving to the window with predatory grace. Marco handed him a tablet displaying what looked like surveillance footage, and Alessandro's eyes narrowed as he studied the screen. "What's happening?" Leah asked, her heart suddenly racing. Alessandro looked at her, and she saw the warrior beneath the wounded man. "They've found me. Or rather, they've found where they think I might be. My enemies are conducting sweeps of every property within a 20-mile radius of the crash site. They'll reach your neighborhood within the next 6 hours. Then you need to leave. Go somewhere safer." "No." His response was immediate and firm. "Leaving now would expose me during transport. They'll have spotters watching every route out of the area. The safest place I can be is right here, hidden in plain sight in a house they have no reason to suspect." He turned to Marco. "Implementa il protocollo Castello. Voglio 2 squadre in posizione entro un'ora." Marco nodded and disappeared, already speaking into his phone. Alessandro moved back to the couch, but the relaxed man from earlier was gone, replaced by someone calculating and dangerous. "Leah, I need you to listen very carefully. For the next several hours, this house will be under maximum security. My men will be positioned inside and out, ready to respond to any threat. You'll be safe, I promise you that. But I need you to stay calm and follow any instructions Marco or I give you without question. Can you do that?" Leah wanted to argue, wanted to demand that he leave and take his war with him. But looking at his face, at the determination and something else, something that looked almost like protectiveness, she found herself nodding. "Okay, but Alessandro, if someone gets hurt because of this, if one of your men dies protecting you, then I'll carry that weight, as I carry all the others." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "But I won't let anything happen to you. That's a promise I intend to keep." Outside, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Leah of the burning plain. And inside her small, ordinary house, a war was quietly being prepared, a war she'd become the center of without ever choosing to fight. Night fell like a curtain dropping on a stage, transforming Leah's quiet neighborhood into something resembling a chessboard where invisible pieces moved with lethal purpose. She watched from her bedroom window as Marco's men took positions, some in the houses across the street that were apparently vacant, or whose owners had been quietly evacuated. Others in vehicles that looked perfectly normal, but whose occupants never moved, never relaxed, never stopped scanning the darkness. Alessandro had retreated to her living room, surrounded by laptops and communication equipment that had been delivered in unmarked boxes. He worked with focused intensity, orchestrating a defense that Leah couldn't fully comprehend but could definitely feel. The house itself had been transformed. Additional locks had been installed on every door and window. Security cameras now monitored every angle of the property, their feeds displayed on multiple screens that Marco watched with unwavering attention. A weapons cache had been discreetly positioned in the hallway closet. Leah had glimpsed it when retrieving towels and immediately regretted looking. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a fortress, and she was both its most protected resident and its most dangerous liability. Around 8 p.m., Alessandro called her into the living room. He looked exhausted, the pain medication wearing off and the toll of his injuries becoming visible again. But his eyes were sharp, alert, missing nothing. "I need to explain what's about to happen," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "In approximately 2 hours, a convoy will pass through this neighborhood conducting what appears to be a routine patrol. They're actually searching for me, using thermal imaging and other surveillance technology. My men will be creating false signatures 3 blocks away to draw their attention. But there's a chance they'll still scan this house. And if they do?" Leah's voice was steadier than she felt. "They'll see exactly what they expect to see. A single woman at home, watching television, going about her normal evening routine. Marco has rigged a system that will mask my heat signature and that of the additional men inside. To their equipment, this house will appear completely ordinary. But Leah," his voice softened slightly, "you need to actually be doing those normal things. Can you sit in front of the television for 2 hours, acting relaxed and natural, knowing that men with guns are scanning your house?" She wanted to say no, wanted to scream that none of this was normal, that she was a nurse who saved lives, not someone who played spy games with criminals. But instead, she thought of the man she'd pulled from the ocean, the weight of him in her arms, the way his heart had still been beating when every logical outcome said it shouldn't be. She'd saved him then. She could protect him now. "I can do it," she said. "But you need to tell me something first. The truth, Alessandro. Are we going to survive tonight?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him make a decision, to trust her with honesty, rather than comforting lies. "I don't know. My enemies are powerful, well-resourced, and motivated. But I'm still alive, which means I'm either very lucky or very good. Probably both. And I have something they don't expect. You, a woman with no connection to my world, in a house they have no reason to suspect. That advantage might be enough. Might be. It's the best I can offer." Leah nodded and moved to the couch, turning on the television to a random sitcom, whose laugh track felt obscene given the circumstances. Alessandro retreated to the darkened hallway, just a shadow among shadows. Marco and his men became invisible, their presence erased so completely that if Leah hadn't known they were there, she would have believed herself alone. The wait began. The first hour passed with agonizing slowness. Leah forced herself to watch the television, to laugh at appropriate moments, to get up once to make tea, and then return to her spot on the couch. She felt the weight of eyes on her, not just the surveillance equipment outside, but also Alessandro watching from the darkness, Marco monitoring every screen, the men positioned throughout the house ready to transform from invisible to lethal in an instant. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the teacup, but she hid it well, tucking them beneath a throw blanket. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Marco's radio crackled with a brief, coded message. The convoy was 3 blocks away. Leah forced herself to breathe normally, to not look toward the windows, to keep her eyes on the television screen, even though she couldn't have said what show was playing. Outside, she heard the low rumble of heavy vehicles, military-grade SUVs, Alessandro had explained, equipped with technology that cost more than most houses. They were moving slowly, methodically, scanning each property as they passed. 2 blocks away, 1 block, then directly outside. The vehicles stopped. Leah's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain the surveillance equipment would detect it, would mark her as abnormal, would trigger an investigation that would end with bullets and blood. But she didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat on her couch, watching television, occasionally sipping tea that had long since gone cold. In the hallway, Alessandro remained perfectly still, a statue carved from darkness and discipline. The seconds stretched into eternities. Then, after what felt like hours but was probably only 3 minutes, the vehicles moved on. The rumble of engines faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the pounding of Leah's pulse in her ears. She waited, not daring to move until Alessandro finally stepped into the light. His expression was unreadable, but when their eyes met, she saw something that might have been relief or respect, or something deeper she couldn't name. "You did perfectly," he said quietly. "They saw nothing suspicious. You're a natural." "I never want to be a natural at this," Leah replied, her voice shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "This isn't my world, Alessandro. I save lives in hospitals, not—" She gestured helplessly at the surveillance equipment, the hidden weapons, the war being waged in her living room. "I know." He moved closer, sitting carefully on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining distance, but somehow feeling nearer than before. "And I'm sorry that I brought my world crashing into yours. Literally." A ghost of a smile. "But you're handling it with more grace than most trained professionals would." "I don't feel graceful. I feel terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. It's the people who aren't afraid who make fatal mistakes." He paused, studying her face in the flickering television light. "Tell me something, Leah. Why did you really pull me from that water? The truth, not the noble answer about saving lives." She considered lying, offering something simple and heroic. But he'd been honest with her, brutally so, and she found herself returning the favor. "I don't know. I saw you there, trapped in that wreckage, and something in me just refused to let you die. It wasn't rational, wasn't a conscious choice. It was like my body moved before my brain caught up. And now, sitting here with armed men in my house and criminals searching the neighborhood, I keep wondering if I made the right choice. If maybe the world would be better off if I'd just driven away and let the ocean claim you. Maybe it would be." His response was quiet, without anger or defensiveness. "I've done terrible things in my life, Leah. Things that would horrify you if you knew the details. I've ordered deaths, destroyed lives, caused pain that ripples through families and communities. The scales of justice would probably tip against me in any cosmic accounting. Then why do you do it? Because someone has to. Because the world I operate in doesn't run on laws and courtrooms. It runs on power and fear, and the ability to project both convincingly. If I weren't in control of my organization, someone worse would be. Someone who doesn't maintain the codes we follow, the lines we don't cross. I'm not a good man, Leah, but I'm better than the alternatives. That's a depressing philosophy. It's an honest one." He shifted slightly, and she saw the pain cross his features. "You should rest. The danger tonight is past, but tomorrow brings its own challenges. Marco's men will maintain watch, but you need sleep. What about you? I'll rest later. First, I have calls to make, strategies to finalize. The people who tried to kill me made a mistake tonight. They revealed their search patterns, their methods, their resources. That information is valuable, and I intend to use it." Leah stood, exhaustion suddenly crashing over her like a physical weight. But before she could retreat to her bedroom, she found herself asking one more question. "Alessandro, after all this is over, after you disappear back into your world, and I return to mine, will you remember me? Or will I just be another person in a long line of people who helped you survive?" He looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that felt like truth. "I will remember you, Leah Parker. Not because you saved my life, though that would be reason enough, but because in 36 hours, you've shown me something I'd forgotten existed. Genuine courage without agenda. Kindness without expectation of reward. You pulled a stranger from fire and water, brought him into your home and protected him despite every logical reason not to. That kind of person? You don't forget them. Ever." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning neither seemed ready to fully acknowledge. Leah nodded, not trusting her voice, and retreated to her bedroom. But as she lay in darkness, listening to the quiet murmur of Alessandro's phone calls and the subtle movements of Marco's men throughout the house, she realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was starting to care about the dangerous stranger sleeping on her couch, not as a patient or a responsibility, but as something else entirely. Something that had no place in her ordinary life, but was taking root anyway, stubborn and undeniable as the dawn that would inevitably come. Outside, the night deepened, and across the city, Alessandro's enemies began to realize that their prey had slipped through their fingers once again. The hunt would continue. The danger would escalate. But for tonight, in a small house on a quiet street, a nurse and a Mafia boss existed in a strange bubble of safety, both knowing it couldn't last, but neither quite willing to acknowledge what waited beyond it. Morning arrived with deceptive gentleness, sunlight streaming through Leah's bedroom window and painting golden stripes across her walls. For a moment, one beautiful, blessed moment, she forgot everything. Then awareness returned, the weight of exhaustion from too little sleep, the sound of unfamiliar voices speaking Italian in her living room, the reality that her house had become ground zero in a war she didn't understand. She dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, pulling her hair into a ponytail and taking several deep breaths before opening her bedroom door. The scene that greeted her was surreal in its domesticity. Alessandro sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands, looking almost normal except for the fresh bandage on his forehead and the way he held himself, coiled tension barely disguised as relaxation. Marco stood by the window, his posture military straight, while two other men she recognized from yesterday were reviewing something on a laptop. When Alessandro saw her, he stood immediately, a gesture of respect that felt out of place coming from a man who commanded an army. "Good morning," he said. "Coffee's fresh." Marco picked up pastries from that bakery on 5th Street. Apparently he researched your favorite breakfast places. Leah blinked, looking at Marco, who shrugged with what might have been embarrassment. "Security includes knowing the target's routines and preferences," he said in his heavily accented English. "The almond croissants are very good." Despite everything, Leah laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its genuine amusement. "You researched my breakfast preferences. That's either very thoughtful or deeply creepy, and I'm too tired to figure out which." She poured coffee, added cream, and grabbed a croissant that was, admittedly, excellent. "So what happens today? More convoys? More hiding?" "Actually," Alessandro said, settling back into his chair with visible relief. "Today, we go on the offensive. Last night's surveillance gave us everything we needed: vehicle signatures, communication frequencies, patrol patterns. My technical team has been working through the night tracing those signals back to their source. We know who's hunting me, and more importantly, we know where they're operating from." "And what will you do with that information?" "End the threat." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing something as mundane as grocery shopping, rather than what sounded suspiciously like planned violence. "By sunset tonight, the people responsible for the plane crash will no longer be in a position to harm anyone. The operation is already in motion, assets deploying, pressure being applied in very specific places. This will be finished soon. Assets deploying, Leah repeated the phrase, tasting its clinical detachment. You mean people? Your people, going to hurt or kill other people? Yes. No hesitation. No attempt to soften the truth. I told you I wasn't a good man, Leah. This is what that looks like in practice. I don't enjoy it, but I don't shy from it either. It's necessary. How many people will die today because of this? Alessandro's eyes held hers, and she saw something like pain flicker across his features. As few as possible. I'm not interested in a massacre or excessive violence. The goal is to eliminate the leadership of the organization that targeted me, and make it clear that further attempts would be suicidal. If that can be accomplished through intimidation and strategic pressure rather than bloodshed, that's preferable. But if not... He trailed off, the implication clear. Leah set down her coffee cup, suddenly nauseous. I'm a nurse. I've taken an oath to do no harm, to save lives whenever possible. Everything you're describing goes against everything I believe in. I know. Which is why I'll never ask you to be part of it, never expect you to condone it or assist with it. Your hands stay clean, Leah. That's non-negotiable. He leaned forward slightly, his expression intense. But I won't lie to you either. I won't pretend to be something I'm not, or that my world operates by your rules. This is who I am. This is what I do. And if that makes you regret pulling me from that water, I'll understand. The question hung between them. Did she regret it? Should she? Leah looked at the man across from her, seeing both the sophisticated, commanding leader and the wounded human who'd been hours from death. She thought about the way he'd promised to protect her, the care he'd taken to keep her safe, the respect in his eyes when he looked at her. She thought about the alternative. Walking away from that crash, letting him drown, never knowing this strange connection that had formed between them. I don't regret it, she said finally, but I hate what comes with it. The violence, the danger, the casual way you talk about people dying. It's everything I've spent my career fighting against. I know. And I'm sorry that saving my life means being exposed to this darkness. Alessandro stood, moving to the window beside Marco, his silhouette framed by morning light. One more day, Leah. By tomorrow morning, this will be over. My enemies will be dealt with, the threat eliminated. I'll leave your life, and you can return to saving people in ways that don't require weapons or tactics. You can forget I ever existed. What if I don't want to forget? The words escaped before Leah could stop them, hanging in the air like a confession. Alessandro turned slowly, his expression unreadable, while Marco suddenly found the laptop screen intensely fascinating. The two other men quietly excused themselves, leaving the kitchen with the practiced invisibility of professionals who knew when to disappear. What are you saying? Alessandro asked quietly. I don't know. Leah stood, frustrated with herself, with him, with the entire impossible situation. I'm saying that for 2 days, I've had a front row seat to your world, and it's terrifying and wrong and against everything I believe in. But I've also seen the way you protect the people under your command, the loyalty they show you, the code you operate by even when it would be easier not to. You're not a good man by conventional standards, but you're not the monster you pretend to be either. Aren't I? Something bitter crept into his voice. You've seen my war room, Leah, not my battlefield. You haven't watched me put a gun to someone's head and pull the trigger without hesitation. You haven't seen the aftermath of my orders. The bodies, the widows, the children who grow up without fathers, because I deemed their deaths necessary. Don't mistake efficiency for humanity. I'm not. I see exactly what you are. She moved closer, closing the distance between them despite every logical voice in her head screaming at her to maintain space. You're someone who inherited a violent legacy and chose to shape it rather than escape it. Someone who maintains order in chaos, even if that order comes at a terrible price. Someone who... She paused, searching for words. Someone who's been alone for so long he's forgotten what it's like to be seen as human rather than a weapon. Alessandro stared at her, something cracking in his carefully maintained armor. You're romanticizing a criminal, Leah, creating a narrative that makes me palatable to your conscience. No. I'm seeing you clearly for the first time, without the shock and fear clouding my judgment. And what I see is complicated and morally gray and probably dangerous for me to feel anything about. But that doesn't make it less real. Feel anything about? He repeated the phrase slowly. What exactly do you feel, Leah Parker? It was a challenge, and a question, and something else. An invitation to be as honest as he'd been with her. Leah took a breath, committing to a truth she'd been avoiding since pulling him from the water. I feel like I didn't just save your life. I feel like you've somehow become part of mine. And even though every rational thought says I should want you gone, there's something in me that dreads tomorrow morning when you disappear. Which is insane, because we've known each other for 48 hours, and you're literally a mob boss, and I'm a nurse, and there's no universe where this makes sense. No, Alessandro agreed. There isn't. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching, but sense has nothing to do with what I feel when I look at you. Gratitude, yes. You saved my life, and that debt is enormous. But also something else. Something I haven't felt in years because I couldn't afford to. You make me want to be the man you seem to see when you look at me, even though I know I'll never deserve that vision. Alessandro, no. Let me finish. His hand finally made contact, fingertips brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness. After tonight, when the threat is eliminated and I return to my world, I'll remember this. I'll remember you standing in your kitchen telling a criminal that he's human, that he's worth seeing as more than a weapon. No one has said that to me in I don't know how long. Maybe ever. Before Leah could respond, before she could process the weight of his words, or the way his touch sent electricity through her nerves, Marco's phone buzzed urgently. He answered in clipped Italian, his expression darkening, then looked at Alessandro with obvious concern. Boss, abbiamo un problema. Uno dei nostri punti di osservazione è stato compromesso. Stanno arrivando. Alessandro's transformation was instantaneous. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced by the warrior. Quanto tempo abbiamo? 10 minuti, forse meno. Allora ci muoviamo adesso. Codice rosso. Alessandro turned to Leah, his expression hard, but his eyes apologetic. They've found us. I don't know how, but one of our surveillance points has been compromised. We need to move you to a secure location immediately. Move me! Leah's voice rose. This is my house, which is now a target. Leah, please, I need you to trust me one more time. Marco will take you to a safe house that's been prepared for exactly this contingency. You'll be protected, comfortable, and completely secure. But we need to go now. What about you? I'll be fine. This is what I do. Evade, engage, eliminate. But I can't do it effectively if I'm worried about you becoming collateral damage. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Please, Leah, let me protect you the way you protected me. The sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines moving fast. Marco was already on his radio, issuing rapid commands. Outside, Leah could see Marco's men taking defensive positions, their casual disguises abandoned in favor of tactical readiness. This was really happening. Her quiet, ordinary life was about to become a battlefield. Okay, she said, the word coming out small but steady. Okay, I'll go. But Alessandro... She grabbed his hand, surprising them both. You survived this. Don't you dare die after I went through all that trouble to save you. A flash of genuine warmth crossed his features. I'll do my best. Now go. Marco will keep you safe until I can retrieve you myself." Marco was already moving, ushering Leah toward the back door where a nondescript sedan waited with its engine running. She looked back once, seeing Alessandro standing in her kitchen, transformed into something simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, a warrior preparing for battle. Then Marco's hand was on her arm, gentle but insistent, and she was being guided into the car. The last thing she saw before they pulled away was her small house, surrounded by armed men, about to become the center of a storm she'd inadvertently unleashed by refusing to let a stranger drown. The safe house was a penthouse apartment in the financial district, all glass walls and modern minimalism that felt like a different planet from Leah's modest home. Marco had driven in silence, taking a route that involved 3 car changes and what felt like deliberate circles before arriving at an underground garage. The security was absurd. Biometric scanners, armed guards who nodded respectfully to Marco, multiple locked doors before reaching the elevator that required a keycard and fingerprint to activate. By the time they reached the apartment itself, Leah felt like she'd entered a fortress disguised as luxury real estate. "You'll be safe here," Marco said, his English more halting now, stress bleeding through his professional composure. "Food in the kitchen, clothes in your size in the bedroom. Don't ask how we got your sizes. Windows are bulletproof. Building security is ours. No one reaches you without going through multiple layers of very motivated professionals. How long will I be here? Until the boss says otherwise. Could be hours, could be days. Depends on how things." He trailed off, apparently deciding that finishing that sentence wouldn't be helpful. "How things go when Alessandro confronts the people trying to kill him," Leah finished. "You can say it, Marco. I'm not naive about what's happening." The older man studied her with new respect. "No, you're not. Most civilians would be hysterical by now. You're handling this with remarkable composure." I'm screaming internally, if that helps. A ghost of a smile. "It does, actually. Shows you're human. The boss..." Marco paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He cares about your safety. More than is probably wise, given the circumstances. I've served him for 12 years, and I've never seen him this, invested in protecting someone outside the organization." "What are you trying to say, Marco?" "I'm saying that whatever is happening between you two, it's real enough that he's making decisions with his heart rather than his head, which is dangerous for a man in his position, but also somewhat beautiful to witness. He's been alone for so long. Cold, calculating, never letting anyone close. Then you pull him from the ocean, and suddenly he's human again. That's worth protecting, Signorina. Even if it makes my job significantly more complicated." Before Leah could respond, Marco's phone buzzed. He answered, his expression immediately grave, speaking rapid Italian that Leah couldn't follow. When he hung up, his jaw was set in a hard line. "I need to return to the boss. You'll have 4 men stationed in the building, 2 in the lobby, 2 on this floor. They won't enter the apartment unless there's an emergency, but they're there. Don't leave. Don't open the door for anyone except me or the boss. Understood? Marco, what's happening? The boss is engaging the enemy. That's all I can tell you. But Leah..." He moved toward the door, then looked back. "He'll survive this. He always does. It's what he does best." Then Marco was gone, and Leah was alone in a stranger's apartment, surrounded by luxury that felt hollow and cold. She moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city that sprawled below like a circuit board of lights. Somewhere out there, Alessandro was fighting for his life. People were probably dying, violence unfolding in the shadows while ordinary citizens went about their evening routines, unaware of the war being waged just out of sight. She should feel guilty for not calling the police, for being complicit in whatever Alessandro was doing. Should be horrified by the entire situation. Instead, she felt a gnawing anxiety that had nothing to do with morality, and everything to do with the terrifying realization that she was desperately worried about a man she barely knew. A criminal. A killer. someone who should repel her, but instead had somehow become the most important person in her suddenly upended world. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Leah tried to eat, couldn't. Tried to watch television, found every program meaningless. She paced the apartment, counting steps, monitoring her phone for messages that never came. Night fell properly, the city lights intensifying as darkness claimed the sky. And still, nothing. No word from Marco. No call from Alessandro. Just silence and the maddening inability to do anything except wait. At 10:30 p.m., her phone finally rang. Unknown number. She answered immediately. Leah. Alessandro's voice, rough and tired but gloriously alive. Are you safe? Yes, Marco's men are here. What about you? Are you hurt? Nothing serious. Some bruises, minor cuts. Nothing compared to the plane crash, I promise. He paused, and she heard the exhaustion in his voice. It's over. The organization that targeted me has been dissolved. Their leadership is either dead or has agreed to very specific terms of surrender. The threat is eliminated. Leah sank onto the expensive couch, relief washing through her so powerfully she felt dizzy. Thank God. So what happens now? Now you go home. Marco will collect you within the hour and ensure your house is secure. The surveillance equipment will be removed, the additional security measures dismantled. By tomorrow morning, it will be as if none of this ever happened. And you? Silence on the other end, heavy with unspoken words. Then, I return to my world. You return to yours. It's better this way, Leah. Cleaner. Safer for you. Is that really what you want? What I want is irrelevant. What's best for you is all that matters. That's not an answer, Alessandro. That's a deflection. Leah stood, anger suddenly cutting through her relief. You don't get to make that decision unilaterally. Not after everything that's happened. Not after what you said in my kitchen about how I make you feel. Leah. No. You listen to me for once. I know your world is dangerous. I know being close to you means accepting things I've spent my life opposing. I know there's no logical reason for this connection between us to exist. But it does exist. And you walking away because you've decided it's better for me is just you being afraid. Afraid? His voice sharpened. Of what, exactly? Of being vulnerable. Of caring about someone who can't be controlled or commanded. Of having a weakness that your enemies could exploit. You're not protecting me by leaving, Alessandro. You're protecting yourself from having to feel anything real. The silence that followed was so long that Leah thought he might have hung up. Then he spoke, his voice low and raw in a way she'd never heard before. You're right. I am afraid. Terrified, actually. Because everyone I've ever cared about has either been hurt because of me or used against me. My mother died in an attack meant for my father when I was 15. The woman I loved in my 20s was kidnapped and traumatized by rivals trying to force my hand. I learned early that caring is a liability in my world, that love is a weapon pointed at your own heart. So yes, I'm afraid. Afraid that getting close to you will put you in danger I can't always prevent. Afraid that I'll be the reason something terrible happens to you. And I'm afraid too, Leah replied, her voice gentler now. Afraid that letting you walk away means never knowing what we could have been. Afraid that I pulled you from the ocean just to lose you to your own fear. But Alessandro, I didn't save your life just so you could waste it being alone. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you stop deciding what's best for me and let me make my own choices. I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we try to figure this out together instead of you making grand, noble gestures that leave us both miserable. I'm suggesting... She took a breath, committing fully. I'm suggesting that you come to the safe house tonight. That we talk, really talk, about what happens next. not as a criminal and the woman who saved him, but as two people trying to navigate something neither of us expected. That's dangerous. Everything about you is dangerous. But I jumped into burning wreckage to save you. So clearly I'm not great at avoiding danger when it matters. She heard him laugh, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. You're extraordinary, Leah Parker. Absolutely extraordinary. Is that a yes? It's a yes. I'll be there within the hour. But Leah, what I said about my world being dangerous, about the risks of being close to me, that wasn't an exaggeration. If we do this, if we try to make something work between us, you need to understand that your life will never be simple again. There will always be security concerns, always be risks, always be parts of my life I can't share, or that you won't want to know about. I know, and I'm scared of that. But I'm more scared of the regret I'll feel if I don't at least try. Then I'll see you soon. And Leah, thank you. For saving my life, yes. But more importantly, for reminding me that I have a life worth saving. The line went dead. Leah stood in the center of the luxurious apartment, her heart racing, her mind whirling with the magnitude of what she'd just done. She'd essentially agreed to try to build something with a Mafia boss, a criminal. Someone whose daily life involved decisions she'd find morally reprehensible. It was insane. Reckless. The kind of decision that romance novels were written about because it was too improbable for real life. But she'd also never felt more alive. 53 minutes later, she counted every one. There was a knock at the door. Through the peephole she saw Alessandro, cleaned up but showing signs of the night's violence. A fresh bruise on his jaw, torn knuckles on his right hand, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. She opened the door, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then he stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about being afraid, about making decisions for you instead of with you. You're right. I've spent so long controlling everything, managing every variable, that I forgot what it's like to trust someone else with something as precious as vulnerability." "And now?" Leah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I want to try. I want to see if we can make this work, despite every logical reason it shouldn't. I want to—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I want to know what it's like to be with someone who sees me as human rather than a weapon. Someone who risked her own life to save mine, without knowing who I was or what I could offer in return. Someone who looks at me with hope instead of fear." Leah closed the distance between them, her hand finding his damaged one, careful of the torn knuckles. "Then let's try. No promises, no guarantees, just two people figuring it out as we go." "That's terrifying." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. Someone very wise told me that recently." Alessandro smiled, the first truly unguarded smile she'd seen from him, and raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-world courtesy that should have felt ridiculous, but instead made her breath catch. "You're going to completely upend my life, aren't you?" "Probably. Is that okay?" "It's more than okay. It's exactly what I need, even if I didn't know it until you pulled me from that burning wreckage." He drew her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. "You saved my life, Leah Parker. But I think you might have saved more than that. You reminded me that underneath the violence and strategy and calculated ruthlessness, I'm still capable of feeling something real. That's a gift I can never adequately repay." "You can start by kissing me," Leah said, surprising herself with her boldness. Alessandro's eyes darkened, and he leaned down, his lips meeting hers with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with everything she knew about him. The kiss was soft at first, tentative. two people exploring unfamiliar territory. Then it deepened, becoming something more intense, more honest, a promise of things to come, of complications and challenges and a connection that defied every logical objection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. You realize this won't be easy. There will be times when you hate what I do, when my world intrudes on yours in ways you can't ignore. Times when you question whether this was the right choice. I know. But Alessandro, I'd rather face those challenges with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to try. Then we try. Together. Outside the windows, the city continued its endless rhythm. Millions of people living ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary bargain being struck in the penthouse apartment. Two people from impossibly different worlds, connected by a moment of courage in fire and water, choosing to see where that connection might lead. It was improbable, dangerous, and completely illogical. It was also, Leah realized as Alessandro pulled her close again, exactly what she wanted. The end of one story, and the beginning of another, one written not in blood and violence alone, but in the stubborn determination of two people to find something real in a world that offered little room for such luxuries. One written in the flames that brought them together, and the dawn that promised, despite everything, a chance at something neither had expected, but both desperately needed.